Today, I'm talking with Mike Vorster and John Kaye. Mike is author of Construction Equipment Economics and a contributing editor to our Equipment Executive column. John is Vice President of Equipment and Information Technology for Miller Brothers Construction, and he is a member of our 2023 class of under 40 in construction equipment. So, the price of construction equipment has risen 30% since the month prior to the pandemic. Although the rate of increase has started to level off, those higher costs continue to strain equipment budgets for both acquisition and maintenance. Mike, I'd like to start with you. How would you advise a fleet to respond to these inflationary pressures?
The most important thing I think to realize, and if I just sort of say one simple thing as a starting point, and that is you're maintaining assets which are now more expensive and more valuable than they've ever been. Okay, and therefore the very last thing to do is to cut down on your maintenance budgets and to stop looking after the stuff you've got.
But what's some of the things that Miller Brothers has done over the past couple of years and in preparation for next?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, and this might paraphrase something Mike has said, which is to know our cost. And as we went through this, I'll call it a transformation, and I think we're still experiencing it, hence why we're talking today. Um, it was hard to know in the beginning during the pandemic how much of it was a blip on the radar versus how much of it was extended. And what we've learned is, to Mike's point, it is extended, it's extending, and it's not going down. So what I see happening now to myself and peers I discuss is we're still playing catch up for the last couple of years. So although the cost inflation starting to soften, we're still correcting our rates to reflect the last couple of years inflationary pressures.
If tariffs come to play in 2025, what sort of thing, how have you factored that into your planning?
You know, Rod, to be honest, I wouldn't say I factored tariffs in specifically to my planning at this point. What I have factored in is a continued inflationary environment. If it's inflation driven by tariffs or anywhere else, you need to react and react immediately.
Keep your eyes and ears open with regards to the impact these tariffs might have on the supply chain.
Mike, that's a really good point. Honestly, something I hadn't considered, because you're right. Cost is one thing, and as long as we react, we can get that into the price eventually. But yeah, going back into an environment where we don't know if that undercarriage we need will be on the shelf, or if it's a 6 month wait, then that would be a bad environment to operate in again.
What are some things that a fleet manager needs to be aware of with that relationship between costs and equipment rate?
And to John's point, it's a real fact and it's there. And I think we've got to learn how to work in a growing cost environment. When the cost of your resources goes up, be those resources parts or labor, or the resources, the machines themselves doing the work, there's only one way to really combat that, and that's by increasing your efficiency and reducing waste. I think the important thing to do to sort of combat or to handle this thing is, yes, get your systems right, get your information right, and make the right decisions. To me, the most important is to eliminate waste and improve efficiency, because you are now improving the efficiency of ever more expensive stuff. Okay, don't just think that because your costs are going up, your price can go up.
John, you mentioned that was some of the work you did when you first joined Miller Brothers. Can you give us an example of a way that you've been able to cut costs and get them more under control?
The most important thing we can always do is make sure we're giving the right tools to the jobs. We're not providing them equipment that's oversized or not suited for the task they're doing. And the only way to get that information is to build a relationship and partnership with your project teams. Make sure you understand what they need to actually build the job, and then get the correct tools in their hands to do that. We see a lot, and I talk a lot with OEMs about, kind of paired offerings within their, we'll call them flagship machines, where, I really need the best digger because I'm mass excavating today. Well, I don't necessarily need the technology that goes with that. So am I paying for options that don't benefit my use case today?
This kind of situation where costs are going to go up, and it's going to affect profitability, it's going to affect operations. How important is it that a fleet manager have what we call a seat at the table, so that communication is is clear.
Well, John's just touched on it, and that's this business of getting out with the operating groups and getting onto the job sites, looking at the equipment, understanding where the equipment and how it's being applied. And when it comes to the application and the actual designing the productive teams and looking very, very carefully at what is the right tool for the right job, there's no way that can't be a cooperative effort.
I think one of the benefits of building that relationship, that bridge to the operating team, is when you look at equipment utilization, that's driven by the operating group. I'm here to meet their needs.
In most companies, the site that operation guys are responsible for utilization, but the agony and the pain of underutilized equipment lies in the equipment account with the equipment manager. And that's one of the things we've got to get out of the system if we truly are going to maximize utilization and reduce waste.
You work directly with the executives at Miller Brothers. You have a very good relationship with them. How do you go about communicating the effects of inflation, especially when it comes to planning for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just having open and honest dialogue with the team. Like Mike said, I don't control price, but I control cost. And really, I don't control cost. I just tell the teams what cost is at the end of the day. But the more I can bring them data on why costs are moving, the important. And I think the operating teams value that. So if we're talking, price of inflation, like you mentioned, 30% on new equipment, since the pandemic. We're seeing, I personally think we're seeing costs on parts, replacement parts, even greater than that. But I think these are all conversations we need to bring to the table and say, yes, our costs are moving, but it's in line with what the industry's seeing. And here's also things we're doing to help mitigate it. And here's the ask from you. We can only do so much, back to our previous conversation. Here's some things the operating teams can help with, right? If we can lower idle time, if we can utilize our equipment more, if we can maintain it better, treat it better, do better daily inspections. These are all things that eventually will help drive costs down.
What sorts of technology can be used to increase efficiencies?
For us at Miller Brothers, we really unlocked the benefit or saw the benefit of telematics once we employed a telematics integrator, so we could look at all of our fleet in one system and not rely on the different OEM dashboards. So we had a single place to go and say, okay, let's look at idle time across a class, or let's look at utilization. Give our mechanics the ability to access fault codes regardless of OEM, and things like that drive utilization. The work order process for mechanics and how you do that digitally and how much visibility is given to whoever's supervising your mechanics is very important. We all work with honest people. We all want to believe the best in people, but when you have people out there that feel like they're not being watched even just a little bit, there's inefficiency there, right? I know I perform better when I know my boss is eventually going to ask what I did today. And I want all my mechanics to have that same pressure, not because it's a trust thing, just because I think humans perform better under a little bit of pressures.
And so can we use these technologies to better improve the routing of our technicians, to better improve the wrench time? It's much more important to save an hour of somebody's time when the cost of that hour has gone up a whole lot.
That's a good point, Mike. A lot of the fault codes we get that come through are things that can be reviewed with our shop supervision, and a call to the operator can quickly say, no, this is okay to run until it's next PM. We've also had instances where we believe we've avoided catastrophic failure, where we see a low-level fault code come through, followed by a mid-tier fault code, and the operator is still running the machine in a condition that eventually was going to lead to failure. So.
Saving the need to replace a part becomes much more important when the cost of that part's gone up by 30%. You can invest more in the things that make you efficient when the things you're saving are more expensive.
Let's turn to dealer partnerships. John, you have really strong relationships with your dealers. And I'd like to know what some of the things are that you folks have been working on when it comes down to battling this inflation beast.
With our dealer partners, I think as much communication as you can give them and include them in your business, because they are a part of your business, the more beneficial that can be.
The more we can involve the OEMs and the dealers in our teams, many improvements will come, and many efficiencies and different ways of doing things will be found if we start trusting and working with each other at a personal level. Rod, one of the things we didn't talk about, John alluded to it when he spoke about increased residual values on our machines, is the impact of inflation on the economic ownership period, on the lives of our machines. And are we going to be tempted into saying, well, the new stuff costs so much, we've got to hang on to the old stuff. New stuff is getting more expensive to buy, but so are the spare parts. None of my statistics show that there's a sort of a blanket relationship between inflation and the need to extend lives. If you've been looking after your stuff and your residual values are good, maybe even the inflation should cause you to reduce the lives of your stuff and harvest those gains and move on to the newer, more productive stuff.
We've seen some of our best performing categories are the ones that have trended younger over the last couple of years. And I think that, Mike, that speaks to it. One, we're reaping better availability and better reliability on the machines themselves. I agree with Mike, keeping it when you can, if you have a company that has, the capital allotment to do that, keeping a younger fleet age. I'd much rather spend it on a new machine than band-aiding together an old machine.
Yeah, and there is a gem dropped into the conversation if you have the capital resources, because of course, as we enter inflation, or as inflation increases, so will the cost of money. And so you have to make your buy, borrow, lease, or rent decision very, very, very much more carefully.